Okay, thank you very, very much. Can you all hear me? I hope so. So when I was asked to be part of this group, I was asked to come in as an advisor to this team. I kind of thought, oh, this is a different tribe for me. But I think what it's been very, very interesting during the last 2 days, just very quickly, what has come out, which is quite interesting, is different notions of what might be needed, perhaps some more informed from a traditional positivist tradition, abutting and coming up close to some of the other approaches that we've just heard about previously. And so I sit in a kind of a strange position. I'm trained as a geographer, and I work almost as a broker, I would say, working from the biophysical sciences into the social sciences, and then taking the social sciences back into the biophysical sciences, etc. So I'm going to try and share a little bit where I think we have a community of climate scientists who are grappling with similar issues that you've just heard about. And in a sense, it's always a pity for me, I think, that we don't bring these communities together, because this community has so much richness that could be shared with the community of climate change scientists who are now in their tribe and gang trying to reach out now and do the same kinds of things or similar kinds of things. So it's an interesting tension, I think, and we definitely had the tension in the room in the last 2 days, and I think it was where some of the interesting stuff was that emerged. So I work with climate modelers. I go into work every day and I have to talk climate modeling. And I'm not trained as a climate modeler, and I often wish I had more people that I could talk with from this audience, but they're very highly respected and they are really doing a good job. We have to map, I think, some of the issues that are the matters of concern at a global level. We've got to be a little bit careful, I think, of totalizing or making this picture so scary that you actually remove some of the hope that we can build underneath it. So I've sat in meetings in South Africa where we switch that map of Africa on and it runs out into the future. And I've actually heard ministers of education and others gasping next to me going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So there is an interesting thing that we need to be working on this kind of stuff proactively, but we also need to be mindful of how it can act as a paralysis. The scenarios, unfortunately, I will be talking only South Africa, but we are one of the regions. I worked on the IPCC. Africa is one of the regions most at risk for a number of reasons, not least because of the geography, the climatology, which makes us at risk going forward with climate change, but also, according to some, we're coming off a low base with, in some cases, issues of corruption, issues of chronic service delivery, issues of maldevelopment generated by a whole range of things. So as Hala and many of us who come from South Africa will let you know, we're now in a crisis at the moment. These droughts are going to become more frequent. The heat waves that we are experiencing, much like in the UK and elsewhere, may also become more frequent. And the shorter growing seasons, the longer burning seasons, etc., etc. This is a mouthful. It's really hard now to try and do something with this. And again, I think the point I'd like to make is that we're running out of time. We don't have much time according to the recent IPCC report. So how do we do things more collaboratively and quickly so that we can try and address some of these problems? But one of the interesting things that I keep, again, reflecting on is that the choices we, and I've made that bold, make will create different outcomes. And I want to preface it by saying the approach that some of us are now trying to adopt, which I hear in the sentiments of the previous presentations, is to be more of a humble broker. Because the scientists who get up and make these presentations, which are really urgent and really important and really critical, I think sometimes these images, as I say, can be disempowering, and they might remove the sense of agency that we may need. So we all know what it will take with substantial mitigation and also without substantial mitigation. But what does that mean, really, in terms of a just transition? It's a number, 1.5. What does that really mean? And my daughter, who's been watching the Australian fires burn, she loves animals, 500 million species that are lost now. So what does this really, really mean? So I juggle with that because I'm trained as a climate scientist. I'm reading and working with the wonderful team from Rhodes, Hala and others, and I transgress myself across that space, and then I come back. And it's really, really, really difficult. So again, I've been reflecting on that quite a lot whilst we've been going through the sessions the last 2 days. I was asked to talk about teaching. I'm not really going to focus that much on the teaching, but I thought I'd just give you a sense of what we're trying to do at my university, at Wits, and then how we're trying to scale that up, scale it out, and then scale it in to us as well, thinking reflexively and reflectively. So we have some very good scientists who are dealing with complex systems, not just the complicated systems, but the complexity, how we can bring different sciences from the universities, arranging curricula, looking at feedbacks, et cetera, et cetera. So a whole range of science that is dealing with that. We also have climate scientists who are doing a great job in terms of archaeology. We heard issues around the time scale earlier, so paleo dimensions, climate reconstruction. I spent much of my work trying to reconstruct climate using documentary sources from travelers, other sources, not necessarily data sources in the true sense of the word, perhaps true. And then climate decision-making in uncertainty has become a critical area of some of the work that myself and others have been doing. But one point that I'd just like to maybe draw your attention to, and hopefully if you want to hear more, because I think it might have relevance to the University of Bristol and what you're trying to do, I was very struck, and perhaps it was just the way it was presented, I'm not sure, it's strong mitigation focus, strong lifestyle kind of focus, but I was wondering about the kind of risk reduction, disaster risk reduction, adaptation, that kind of focus, and also the justice elements, which I think did come through. But we've been working with a group in our university who have developed and spun up a guy by the name of Witwatersrand, who through teaching and learning and other issues is developing a climate justice charter, which is working on food sovereignty, not necessarily food security only, water issues, etc., from multiple directions. And his questions that he's asking is very much similar to what we've been hearing in the first two presentations. What does it mean to be human? What may it take to move to a just transition in South Africa? We're at the moment currently on load shedding again. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, maybe some of our colleagues from the South, but when you have only 4 hours on, 4 hours off, it's really interesting just to teach, to find your way to the classroom and switch on. You've got no PowerPoint, which the students are delighted with. What does it mean? It's maybe quite a message from the universe telling us to really rethink our teaching. Citizens' agency and participation, and then just transition planning. So these kinds of issues, and you can find it on YouTube, and I'll give you the email or the access, because he's really asked me to put this on the table and to see if we can't find some collaborations that you might want to as well on this. And then global change and transformation, social learning, transforming institutions, all the things that we know have been spoken about. We're also trying to reflect on some of those. But I just want to give you two examples from this kind of work as case studies, and I've presented some of this earlier. So working on the international community, this notion of transdisciplinarity gets bandied around quite a lot. How do we bring others into the knowledge creation space and the teaching and learning space? And I found this source and input really interesting, which some of us are trying to work with now in our university, working on the environmental, economic issues, and it's come out in the earlier presentations as well, but also cognizant of the political, social, historical, and individual. But then for me, I think I really like this diagram because often this middle part gets left out. And it's sort of kind of assumed that it's there somewhere. And then we sometimes want to use it sexily to say, I'm engaging artists. But what do we really mean by that? And I'd just like to read that quote. People from all walks of life, multiple realities, enter this fecund middle ground, a zone of non-resistance, ripe with potential and possibilities, being prepared to remain open to others' viewpoints so that they can use inclusive logic, temporarily reconcile contradictions while respecting emergence. And I think that has increasing relevance now for some of us working in the university, because I'm not sure, and I really have to be careful when I say this, but we need to sometimes leave our egos and our baggage outside the room. We need to get out of our own way and not necessarily only the children's way, particularly in terms of teaching, how we break down the silos, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of taking some of that ethos forward, some of us who work in the climate domain, and I just show these two because I think there are some similarities, but perhaps not in all ways. The teaching and learning that has been going on, particularly the learning from Fractal, which was a DFID-funded project, working in a number of countries in Southern Africa, trying to work on multi-stakeholder dialogue, city-to-city learning. And I need to preface this very importantly. that the start of this process was coming from climate scientists. These were climate scientists who are now to try and getting into this kind of space. And that's I go back to my previous plea, it would be great if we could interchange more with the kind of work that's going on in the education space so that we could move some of this forward. So the matters of concern that you heard of other approaches being using that kind of departure point in Maputo, Windhoek, Lusaka, it's not surprising that many of the issues are issues about drainage, sanitation, peri-urban issues, climate services, etc. And so what comes out of that is a number of products on climate risk, impact scenarios, baselines, etc. I'm nearly finished. We've also tried to work in the city of Johannesburg, trying to bring the university into the system, if you like, and then taking the university out into the city with embedded researchers and using a number of approaches. Just quick sharing what we found and what we learned, and maybe in the University of Bristol you're trying to do similar things. What we've found is it's who's not in the room. You never get the same people in the room all the time. The planners, we really struggle to get into the rooms, the business community, and then why aren't they in the room, and why, and how can one better design some approaches. So examples of the engagement, embedded researchers working in the city context, coming back into the university, co-writing publications with actors outside the university, and then working with artists and others in different ways of trying to reimagine some of the teaching that's going on. For me, this is my most exciting project at the moment. I don't know if I should say this too loudly, but I managed to get an artist, to actually a famous artist in South Africa, Haneli Kutsia, to get into the university system. I had to plea and beg the Dean of Science to waiver some of the prerequisites because she's an artist. And what's really interesting, the point I want to make, she's not using her art to communicate the science. She's actually using her art to rethink how one can do some of the science. And this is an eco-seat that she's designing with the technicians, the engineers, and others in the city of Johannesburg, and working with the community. So it's a really nice project, and she's doing a number of these kinds of issues and themes, and traveling with her on that journey is quite interesting. But it wasn't easy to get her into the university. And then I'm just going to quickly conclude. We've heard of Karen O'Brien and others. We know Danella Meadows' work. I think what we're trying to do in the university where I work is to try and think of some of these issues, in particular the practical, like the example I just showed you, going into the political, but then ultimately trying to move into the space of the personal. And here we're engaging with psychologists and others working in these domains. So in conclusion, I would like to ask, as a provocative question, how do we get out of our own way? But more importantly, how is it that we can bring more of a hardware technological solution space in the university, together with the software, the policies, the institutions, working with cities, etc., arts and social media, design that we heard earlier. But where we're struggling with, I think, is more of this hardware stuff, the international motivation for long-term collective action. And then the reward system of how that goes about. The young students that I work with are really wanting to work in the space, but they argue that they're not going to get promoted because some of the journals aren't there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the issues are there. I think we really want to engage in that space, but the university system, I think, can be quite disempowering to such an extent that at one point I left the university and sought refuge in teaching a school. But now, I don't know why, I'm back in the university for another go-round. But it's because I can come and meet with people like yourselves to maybe think of these processes, which are tough nuts to crack. I spend a lot of time at night not sleeping around some of these issues. But thank you very much for the chance to share and to be here and to show you some of the other approaches that we're also trying to think about. Thank you very, very much.